WFLA Now. Feel good and live your best life with Bloom Health Club. Here's Gail Guayardo.
We are kicking off today's Bloom Health Club with inspiring stories from the legendary Kerry Sanders. While he may have retired as a correspondent for NBC News, his storytelling journey is far from over. Now, armed with a backpack and a passion for discovery, Kerry is traveling the country, shining a light on remarkable individuals who embody selflessness through acts of kindness and compassion. Kerry Sanders, welcome to the Bloom Health Club.
Oh, well, thank you so much. Great to see you, Gail.
It's great to see you too. So when I heard that you were retiring as an NBC correspondent, a man who is legendary for his storytelling skills, I thought, man, what a travesty. But then not long after that, I heard about the backpack story. So tell me about it.
So we call it backpack journalism, me and one friend really, primarily Dan Beckman in Hawaii, in that could we do television news stories? We want to focus on the good things in life. Could we do it and have all the gear that we would do it with in a backpack? I need to explain to you at NBC the amount of gear that we would carry around. It was close to $450,000 worth of gear in the back of really, really big SUVs, 30 cases of gear, upwards of 9 cameras on a truck, lights, just a tremendous amount of equipment. And we wondered, could we just do it with a cell phone? And so we kind of landed on this idea that we would get, and fortunately with the support of Apple, using their gear, 4 iPhones and an iPad and a couple small tripods, and we're in business.
That's unbelievable. Tell me about the very first story that you launched. And come Wednesday, you can actually watch this on Bloom, our globally syndicated health and wellness show. We're going to air the story in its entirety. We're going to post it on bloomtampabay.com so that you can watch it. But the first story that you went out on was about a house that was built in 10 days.
So I'm sitting in my backyard in South Florida, and my phone rings, and I see the name pop up, James Crocker. And I'm thinking, I know James Crocker. Help me remember why I know James. And he goes, Kerry, James here. And I go, hi. And I'm searching through my mind, who is James? And he goes, you may remember me because you did a story with me about COVID. And so what I had done with him was in those early days of the chaos of COVID, when we were really unsure, is there a silver bullet? One theory was if you got COVID and then you actually survived it, your plasma was supercharged, and you could then take your plasma and put it into somebody else who was ill, and it would save them. That was a big story. Science was trying to figure it out. Was this the silver bullet? Now, we now know that was not what is going to save somebody's life. In his particular case, he donated plasma. The person got better. The scientist said, we don't know, but we think this might have done it. And so there was just like this really exciting moment. Time passes, we do the story, that airs 2 years plus later, I get a call. Again, James Crocker. He reminds me of the story I had done with him. And he goes, look, Kerry, I was reading a newspaper article of this woman up in Kentucky with the most tragic of circumstances. She went into the hospital with kidney stones. And as a result of what happened during some medicine she was given, it drew the blood out of her extremities, out of her hands and arms, out of her legs. It's natural. That's what they wanted to do. But she had a really tragic consequence where essentially her arms and her legs died without the blood. And so they had to amputate her arms and her legs. Now, this is a mother of 2, former cheerleader, just an all-round wonderful woman. He doesn't know her. This is a complete stranger. I mean, James lives in Florida. He gets in his pickup truck, he drives up to Kentucky, and he meets her. And he's like, I just feel like I need to do something. He had done something during COVID. He thought he maybe saved a life. He wanted to do something again. He goes there and he's thinking to himself, I'll meet her, maybe I'll help her redo her bathroom and stuff. Well, he goes to her house and realizes where she lives is not going to work. It's not just doing a bathroom. And he's a go-getter. He's a leader. He's the kind of guy that says, there's a problem, I'm going to solve it. He goes to tiny Stanford, Kentucky, I mean, it's a really small place. To give you an idea how small it is, they have a pizzeria there that's only open, I think, 6 days a week, and it opens at 5 and closes at 8. Can you imagine a pizzeria even surviving on those hours?
Right.
So, it's only open a couple hours a day, but it reflects a population of about under 4,000. So he decides to get the people in the area, and he doesn't know them. He's a stranger. Let's all get together and let's build her a house. Now, again, these are strangers. A lot of people, even though it's a small town, not everybody knows everybody. And he extends it just a little bit beyond the town and finds a piece of property. And he says, okay, let's build a house, but we really need to build this house quickly. Can we do it in 10 days? And everybody gets together. They work up a schedule, and they had poured a foundation. They go in 10 days from foundation to completed house. And it was just remarkable. And just to reflect what I think is visually apparent without me hitting you over the head, but we're talking about it now, is there's the white community, the black community, the Hispanic community, the Amish community, everybody who came together for this. And I was really struck by how everybody, again, people who didn't know each other, much less know her, said, let's do something. And, it's the season of giving now, but this is something that you'd like to think we as a community can do on a regular basis. Help somebody who needs help.
So help me with the timeline of this. When you receive this phone call and you're sitting at your house and you're trying to, because you meet so many people and you do so many stories, and so you're trying to piece this together in your mind. Is that the point that you heard from Apple that they're trying to launch this new storytelling mission?
Okay,
had that already happened?
It had not happened.
Okay.
In fact, I happened to have been on a Zoom call where I was consulting a tech company trying to figure out how to help journalists move video from point A to point B over the internet. And Apple joined that call. I did not have any contacts at Apple.
Okay.
I don't know.
So this is all serendipitous,
there.
how this all came together.
Yes. In fact, I had been on that Zoom call the day before James called. And as they were talking about things and I was explaining to them the challenges of moving video and everything else, as the call was wrapping up, I said, hey guys, I've been reading about this new technology you have, Final Cut camera, and I'm wondering, could we put it to the test? Maybe you send it and let me just try it out. And so they said, oh, I think we can probably do that. We'll find out. We have a way of lending gear and then getting it back. And so I think we could do that. So they sent me some gear to try it out. But here's the weird thing. They didn't send it to me the next day. It was the next day that James called me. So I'm like, I'm going to be getting this gear. And now James just called me. Serendipity is right. These two crisscrosses happened at the same time. It also happened that Apple was having some big announcement with one of their new pieces of software or some big deal like that. And so I didn't get the gear immediately. And then I was getting ready to go to Kentucky and I still didn't have the gear. And I'm like, you guys promised me you'd be sending me this. And they're like, oh, yeah, I don't know whether we can get it to you in time. And I'm like, you have to get it to me in time. They're not going to delay the building of this house. And we want to we definitely want to document what's going on here. So thank God for FedEx. Several arms within a very big company can sometimes be disjointed. They were supposed to send me 4 iPhones and 1 iPad. They're such a big company, and they were a little confused. They sent me 12 iPhones and 3 iPads. And so I actually had a lot of cameras to set up initially. I sent a bunch of them back. I only needed really 4 and 1 iPad, and then started working on, let's see what's possible. There was no ramp up for me. It was like on-the-job training. I was learning how to do this as it was unfolding.
And I don't think that those 4 iPhones and the iPad, including the ones that you had to send back of iPhones.
Oh, they've got them all back now. They've got them all now.
So those could have landed in better hands, because if you're going to try something new and see how storytelling can unfold with equipment, landing in the hands of Kerry Sanders, legendary storyteller, is the way to go, because the piece that you put together was it was like mastery.
Well, thank you. That's very kind of you to say. Of course, the stories are a reflection of the people you meet and the people who you interview, and that's really what I think tells the story. The challenge is I am not a professional cameraman, and I would never try to pass myself as a professional cameraman. Can I get the basic shots to tell a story so that when you watch it on your phone or watch it on your TV or where you watch it, that you don't say to yourself, it looks wrong. Something's off. No, I want you to listen to the story, hear the story, and say, that was amazing, and never think about how was that captured? Was it on a phone? Was it on an expensive camera? Where's a crew of 9 people out there? No, I want you to just think, what a great story. And if I can achieve that, then I think I am showing what is possible with the new technologies that we have out there.
Well, it is pretty incredible because I've been in this industry since 1988. And I've seen it ebb and flow.
1982. Here, go ahead.
You got me beat by a few years.
I'm old.
We're old school. But, when I started Bloom 4.5, almost 5 years ago, it was my Elizabeth Motley and myself and my cell phone. And it was during the pandemic. And I would go out wearing a mask and try to shoot stories of people just trying to survive and stay alive in their small businesses. And then it made me realize that, that was born out of necessity. That inevitably became the model of our show, is that we create content with our phones. I mean, so do you see this as a new movement and where people can get out there and share stories that need to be told, especially positive ones like you're sharing?
I do. I want to say that my career is built on the skills of incredible journalists who are cameramen and soundmen. And so I respect what they do. And I think that if I were to have given these 4 iPhones to one of the cameramen I used to work with, Carlos Regal, it would have been so much better. Just because they have the eye, the skill, and everything else. That said, I think the real question is when you have the phones and you have the technology to put this together, do you know how to tell a story? Do you know how to listen to what people are saying and put it together? So whether it is an upbeat story like the one I did, or whether maybe it's something going on in your community, the skills of journalism are actually learned in the field, but it's more than just who, what, where, why, when. It's more than just balancing both sides or the many sides of an issue. And just because the technology is there doesn't mean everybody is instantly a journalist or a storyteller. It means that you now have equipment to support those who are ethically going to do the type of storytelling that is fair and honest.
And I'm so glad that you said that as well, because I think with news departments, so rapidly having to churn out information, a lot of great storytellers that had time to do the research, like you say, ethically, dig deep, share stories that need to be told, that it would be a travesty if they were untold. Maybe this opens up an avenue because people are like, why don't you ever retire, Gail? I mean, you keep talking about retiring, you keep showing up again. And I'm like, like baggage. I just keep showing up. And I think it's because the thought of not sharing people's stories, I would feel empty inside.
I get it, because people will say to me, oh my God, Kerry, you had this incredible career and everything else. Truth is, I experienced other people's lives. I mean, I always like to tell kids when I go into school about what I did for a living, is I said, okay, what is the very best day of school this year? And the kids will look around and somebody will sheepishly raise their hand and say, field trip? And I go, exactly. I took a field trip every day. So when I was doing a story with the U.S. Navy and they said, Kerry, we're going to take you out on a nuclear submarine. And I was on the USS Oklahoma, and then we went down to 900 feet. And then they said, Kerry, do you want to drive the sub? And I drove the sub. And this is like the greatest field trip ever. And I got a chance to tell the story about what the Navy was doing at the time and how this nuclear sub, what it figured into the overall defense of the country. But on the side, I mean, Kerry, you get a chance to drive the sub. Who gets that? So I will say that, we are at a moment where we have access to do these sort of things in a better way and an easier way with these phones.
All right, I want to bring in Brody Waddell, who is our digital reporter and lead producer of BloomTampaBay.com, alongside the legendary Kerry Sanders. I mean, this is remarkable what he's able to do.
Yeah, that's really impressive. Like, it's funny to me because that's not necessarily a new thing.
It isn't a
eight
new
years
thing.
ago, I remember even like when I first got into the business, I was like, I can just shoot this. Like iPhones are almost just as good as these cameras now. And you see all these like individuals have blown up, say on YouTube, and obviously the whole podcast movement. It's interesting to me how simplified it's kind of become with these tools.
It isn't new. You're
Mhm.
correct 100%. But there is an infrastructure that has withheld
Mhm.
that progress that we are at right now. Is it a reflection of the economics of today's times? Maybe.
Mhm.
It's also a recognition that with something as small as a phone, and there's a whole generation that's grown up with a phone in their face,
Hmm.
your kids,
Right.
right? And so it is less intrusive and is actually sometimes more honest
Mhm.
than you come in with a crew, you set up a light, the camera is 3 times the size of my head. There's a fuzzy microphone maybe over their head or just down below. And there's this sense of, and then sometimes the cameraman will say, rolling. And everyone's like,
Yeah.
oh, now it's stiff and everybody
Turn
needs to be
on.
kind of
Yeah.
official.
Right.
Whereas you get the cell phone out and you just say so Brody, what was it like when you saw that accident today? And all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, you're not going to believe it, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And there's just sort of an honesty and the word that you often hear is authenticity.
Mhm.
And I think there's a lot of truth to that.
And people like that. What do you think, especially at the cost of this, like all these developments? Obviously, you've been in the business a long time. You've seen a lot. Gail knows it too. Now they are hiring less people. There's less specifics that they need. You don't need someone who just does one thing. Everybody does
Yeah,
this and this and this.
it
and
depends the
saying,
story. If you have a breaking news story and the Tampa Police Department is talk about a story that I remember covering here where there was a serial murderer in town and you think you're going to cover that with a cell phone, forget it. It's
Yeah.
just not going to happen. You might be able to pick up an element for the story where you go knock on a neighbor's door and you take the cell phone out and say, what have you seen? Oh my God, I saw a guy running across the lawn last night. Okay, that's fine. You can't necessarily say, okay, the industry's changed, technology changed everything. You still need the infrastructure of the cameras, the cameramen, the way to transmit it live, all of that kind of stuff. But I would say that there's maybe somewhere between 40 to 60% of the stories that if you look at it and say, what are we going to do with this story? Yes, you could approach it with just the cell phones. Now, the one-man band is a challenge because it's expecting you to have all the skills. So how old are you?
30.
You're 30.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're part of the generation that kind of grew up with phones.
Yeah.
You probably know how to take a computer and edit video. Take yourself back to age 23, okay? You're probably right out of college, coming out of high school. I've been playing with this since I was junior high. I know how to do all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But do you know journalism? You probably don't. And do you know how to access information that somebody doesn't want to necessarily give up? Do you understand public records laws? All these sort of things that you learn on the job. And I can say, and Gail may say the same thing, that a big portion of my career was the tutelage of the cameraman who was older than me, had been in this a long time, and would say, Kerry, why don't you go down to the courthouse and pull the record and saying, I don't know what's going on, and go read it. Those sort of things are what gets lost when you're a one-man band and there's nobody there to help you and you're out there running around trying to figure out how to do it. It's hard to do the on-the-job training without somebody to train you.
And I think it's really important to point out that this backpack journalism that Kerry Sanders is doing right now is a lot different than what you're going to see when you're scrolling on TikTok or Instagram. I mean, those are very entertaining videos. Some of them are very informative. But this is a man who took 4 cameras and an iPad and put together a piece that looked like it was shot by a 30-man crew, that looks like it was shot by those SUVs packed with, hundreds of pounds of equipment and lighting and all of these things. This was a story that will travel, what was it, like 8 minutes, if I recall?
exactly.
It's about 8 minutes long. It is shot like a traditional news story that you would watch on any of your favorite network shows. It is the essence of storytelling, but in a way that I've never seen so brilliantly put together. So I think it's really important to differentiate the difference of streaming social media, which again is entertaining and can be informative, and true journalism at its finest, done in a format that we've never really seen before. And I think that is what I'm concerned about. Because Kerry, you and I were talking off camera that, the athlete A story, the Larry Nassar story, or the Epstein Island story. These were all stories that would have been brushed under the carpet, that were not handled by law enforcement, but it was journalists that brought those very relevant stories to the public eye. And because of the changing face of television news and broadcast, and I'm still in that world, and I still, like you, respect the people that are out there on the day-to-day grind, getting information out, like here at WFLA. I mean, these are some of the most brilliant people that I've ever worked with. But if you don't give somebody like yourself the time and the energy and the wherewithal to the skilled journalists like yourself, to go and find these stories and share them. Yours happen to be really positive energy stories, but Steve Andrews, who worked here, his famous daughter, Erin Andrews, in the world of sports, just to dial you into who I'm talking about, without people like that, there's stories that need to be told that we might not ever hear.
And I think the challenge is, and I'm of course partial to NBC, and I think NBC is really dedicating the time and effort to this. But the real challenge is, especially at the local level, if you have a journalist on staff in the newsroom and they turn 2 stories a year, and your other reporters turn 5 to 10 stories a week, you're looking at it as a financial side, saying, why do we have this person who only does 2 stories a year when we have another person who's doing 10 stories a week? It doesn't make sense. But it's because it's being looked at through the lens of finance, as opposed to the critical role that journalism plays in a community and the Fourth Estate, and holding, those to inspection, that we have to know accountable. So all of those roles are what is in the balance. Now, I can get deep in this because I'm old enough to remember when the FCC only allowed the ownership of 7 TV stations, 7 radio stations, 7 AM, 7 FM, and 5 UHF. And when that deregulation happened in 1982 under Ronald Reagan, and we got into the corporate ownership, they began to realize that if they could own more TV stations, which they can do, and they can consolidate, and now hedge funds are involved, we have a lot of pressure on just the media in general to not only produce information and share what's going on in the community, but to produce money to handle these investments that have really been tremendous. I mean, so much money invested in the ownership of, say, a license to broadcast. You may remember when we started out, and even before it, they used to say an FCC license to broadcast is a license to print money. It's not quite the same anymore.
You're so right. You're so right. Let's go full circle back to backpack journalism. When you were on Bloom, our globally syndicated show, which again will air Wednesday in the Tampa Bay market, and it will be broadcast around the country and the world, you started to talk to me about the next story that you're working on. And because we have time constraints in the land of TV, I had to kind of cut that short. But tell me about the next backpack journalism story that you're working on.
A friend of mine called me up and said, hey, Kerry, I think that you might want to do a story on 0G. And 0G is zero gravity, and it's a plane based in Florida, but it goes all around the country and really around the world, and it takes people up in what is probably best known as the Vomit Comet. It's primarily with NASA, and NASA is doing research in 0G. What could they do? Because they need to plan here on Earth before they spend the hundreds of millions of dollars to send something in space, and then go, it doesn't work in zero gravity. We never thought about that. So they test it as best they can. They have about 30 seconds. So Paul Gramalia calls me up from 0G, and he goes, look, NASA is going to invite this young woman up to go, and I think it might be a nice, interesting story about her. And I said, what do you know about her? And he goes, well, she's a Disney dreamer, and she's interested in science. And that's all he knew. He had two paragraphs on her. So I reached out to her and her family, and we went to lunch. And as we're sitting there over lunch, they explained to me how The family fled Cali, Colombia when she was 7 years old. They were worried about their safety. They came to this country, which they thought, that's the only hurdle our family will ever have to clear. You know, getting out of the danger situation and getting into a safe country, and she'll go to school along with her sister and everything will be fine. Well, turns out this young woman at 7, now 17, has an exceptional mind. And she's a senior in high school, but she's also teaching at Florida Atlantic University as a teacher's assistant in the college level calculus class. And she's really good in science. Anyway, she's just this remarkable person. So I'm listening to this story and I'm thinking, this is very interesting. And then her father tells me, and then of course there's the story of her back. And I go, you know, she's a thin young girl. And I go, explain that to me. And he says, well, when she was 13, I think it was her grandmother put her hand on her back and felt a lump. And I go, wow, what was that? And he goes, well, we were all really worried. And so we went to a doctor after running all of our hands up and down her back. And the doctor said, ooh, she has a severe case of scoliosis. Scoliosis is a curvature of the back. Now, that is not the most uncommon thing in the world, but when it gets severe, it can be debilitating. The pain can be horrible on the lower back. And in a worst case scenario, that curvature, and hers is a dramatic S shape, even though when I look at her, I don't see it, that dramatic S shape can put pressure on the lungs and the heart. And in the worst case scenario, it could lead to death. So that this is like something they need to attend to. So this immigrant family from the doctor winds up getting into an experimental program at New York University Medical School where they're going to, rather than put titanium rods in her back and force it to straighten out, they're going to lace her back, kind of like a shoelace, and they'll tighten it up, and that will, over time, as she grows, straighten up. And so, wow, this is great. But, of course, it's experimental, and this experiment failed. So she is going to have another surgery, and the family is yet to decide. So all of that is background to, she's been invited to go up into this zero-G flight because she's good at math and science. So as I'm talking to her, I'm like, good at math and science? What do you want to do? I mean, let's talk about your future. I want to be a biomedical engineer. I go, excuse me? I want to be a biomedical engineer because I want to take the skills that I can learn from being in zero-G and biomedical engineering and solve what's going on with my back. I don't want to be just a patient. I want to be the person who can then solve this problem for me and, in varying degrees, upwards of 4 million kids in the United States every year who it's discovered have this problem. Again, she's an extreme case. Many of them are so small, nothing ever gets done, or maybe is never even discovered. And so she has now met other biomedical engineers, a guy who got a lot of attention not too long ago, Dr. Deep, because he went down and spent 100...
Joe DeTore.
You know Joe.
Yeah, he's been on our show many times.
Okay, so she meets Joe, and Joe says, not only did I do what I did because I lost a colleague and I wanted to solve it, you're doing it for all the right reasons. You're doing it because you have skin in the game. Literally, you have your spine in this game. And he goes, that makes you very dangerous, and I love that. And of course, this is encouraging her to not only say, I have a dream, but I'm going to follow through with it. And now we connect all the dots. She wants to know, is it possible that the solution to this problem can be first understood by taking gravity out of the situation? And if she can understand the impacts of gravity, then maybe she can figure out a way to find an alternative method to straightening out a spine rather than 2 steel rods, which, just think about, 2 tiny titanium rods, but just think about that in your back, how limited you would be and how you couldn't fold and bend and all the things that, especially, that a kid's going to do.
Yeah, man, this is incredible. So that story is in the final stages of editing.
We're in the final stages of that, getting ready to put that one together.
So where do people watch your stories? How do we find you?
We're starting to work on that.
Okay.
So obviously on Bloom TV.
Yay.
Distribution is something that we're beginning to think about. We first started out with, can we do this with just 4 iPhones and an iPad? And
You've established, yes.
So now we're at the next stage of putting these stories together. I have one other one that I'm working on. And so we're going to have these 3 together. And then we'll start working on the next step of distribution. I mean, obviously posting on YouTube, they're there. YouTube has, I could look up the statistic on my phone. It's something like 140,000 hours of footage is uploaded to YouTube every hour. I mean, it's just insane the amount of material. So finding it, but we're working on that. We wanted to prove to ourselves, all of us coming from professional backgrounds, Dan Beckman, the editor in Hawaii, who used to be the NBC editor in Tel Aviv and was a cameraman in Florida for a long time. Steve Handelsman, who helped me out, longtime NBC correspondent in Washington, who joined me in Kentucky. We're just trying to figure out what is possible. The next step will be distribution.
Well, it was 2 years ago that you came on Bloom and you talked about your retirement from NBC as a correspondent. And here we are, fast forward, and I know I'm going to blink and you're going to have this distribution and you're going to have more brilliant stories out there. And I just can't tell you what an honor and privilege it's been to have you in our studio and here on the Bloom Health Club, Kerry. You really are legendary.
Well, I'm proud to join you and to, of course, have seen your career and to see where you are today. And yeah, this is great. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. All right, Brody, for all of us, thank you here on Bloom Health Club.
All right. Until next time.